Hey guys, okay, so today we're working on a 2006 Nissan X-Trail 4x4 2.5 liter. It's also called a T30 in Europe. So if you want to fast forward to me actually working on this thing, I'll put a little time thing here as always. But just quick description of what's going on. So it's my wife's car, but I did notice the AC has been slowly not working over since last summer. It's now July. So since last summer, it's slowly been just declining, and now it's got pretty well no AC. So we'll check that with the thermometer in the cab there in a second. So I'm pretty sure it's got a coolant leak, but very minor. So what we're gonna do is first check that the system is actually empty, and then we're gonna recharge it, and we're also gonna go over a few ways to find leaks, things like that, and what else could be the problem. So let's get into it. Okay, so we're in the car here. Just gonna turn it on. Turn the AC on. Full blast AC on. And we'll just put a thermometer in the vents here. I know that's hard to see, but it's just under, it's about 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Which is not what it should be. It should be blowing way colder than that. It should actually be blowing just above freezing, so 32 or 0 Celsius. And it's a pretty warm day where I'm in the garage here, and it's 24 Celsius, so it should be blowing a lot colder than that. So let's check out what's going on. Okay, so I'm going to try to make this video as simple as possible. There are so many elements to an AC system that it would take hours to explain them all. So I'm kind of doing sort of like a most common issue type video with AC systems, how to get yourself up and running safely, quickly, as long as there's no major leaks, there's no compressor failure, that type of thing. So we're going to kind of go through the process of what is usually wrong. So these are your access ports for your air conditioning system. There's a low side right here, which has a cap, and then there's a high side right here. Most of the work on the system you do will be on the low side, injecting refrigerant, injecting dyes, things like that will all be through the low side. So one quick way to check to see if you have refrigerant in the system, which is probably obviously the most important thing, you have to have refrigerant or nothing works, including the compressor. So if you don't have refrigerant, the compressor won't click on because there's a switch that tells it there's no pressure in the system on the low side, and it won't come on. So without refrigerant, nothing works. So the first thing to check, do you have refrigerant? The proper way is with gauges. You hook them up to these test ports and check the pressures with the car off first, and then with the car running, which we will do. And all this equipment is not that expensive. Even for a homeowner, you can buy this stuff on Amazon. I'll leave some links where you can buy the equipment that I have. But just a quick way to see if you have refrigerant is to just check these Schrader valves. So in this little port here is a Schrader valve, just like you would have in a tire on your bike or your car. And you can press on that and listen to hear refrigerant escaping. If nothing is escaping, you can be pretty confident the system has been drained and is leaking in some way. So we'll just take a screwdriver and just push gently on the Schrader valve, and I heard a little bit of air escape and then nothing. So that could just be built up air pressure in the system. So that pretty well tells me that the system is totally empty, and we need to figure out, is there a major leak? Is there a minor leak? Is there a leak at all? Well, there is obviously a leak because there is no refrigerant. So the next step is we're going to hook the gauges up to this, confirm that it is empty, and then we're going to hook a vacuum pump up to it, and we're going to evacuate the system and then close it and see if it's a large leak. If it's a large leak, the vacuum will disappear very quickly. If it's a slow leak, you'll be able to hold a vacuum for like days or weeks. So in that case, it's kind of good because it confirms that there's a very tiny leak. And in that case, there's dyes we can add. If it's a super small leak, like it's leaking over a period of months, then it'll get us through the summer, and then maybe next year, something like that, we can add dye to the system and see how bad it is leaking. So let's start by hooking the gauges up. So here's a set of AC gauges. If you've never seen these before, they're pretty simple. There's nothing fancy. It's 2 gauges. This is a low side and a high side gauge. And these are just knobs. That's closed, that's open, closed, open. This is a viewport for when you're adding refrigerant. And basically all it is a high side tube, a low side tube, and a vacuum slash refrigerant delivery tube. And the only difference between these and the ones that you would use for your home air conditioning system is these have quick connects on them for automotive applications. So all we'll do is we'll hook it somewhere convenient here. And like I said, the blue is the low side. So when you start, you're gonna make sure that this is closed, so turned counterclockwise. And all these do is they actually push down on that Schrader valve I was just talking about, and they open the system. So closed is actually backwards. So we'll click it on here. You just pull back, push it on. Make sure these are hand tight. And then we're gonna tighten it down until it pushes that Schrader valve and lets refrigerant into this line, which we don't have at the moment. So we've got the valve closed. If there was refrigerant in this system, it would increase the pressure in this gauge a little bit. So we'll hook up the high side. And the high side is the side after the compressor, so that's why it's high pressure, because it's just been compressed. So we attach there, and valve closed, we got 0 psi. So with these gauges, what happens is when you open these valves, you're essentially giving each side a path to the yellow tube. The yellow tube isn't hooked to anything at the moment. This is what you'll hook to your vacuum pump in a sec. So when these are closed, you're basically just delivering the gas to the gauges, and that's it. These are just connectors to hold the end, they don't do anything. So what we'll do now we've definitely confirmed there is no pressure in the system, and if you open these, again, don't let refrigerant into the atmosphere, but if you were to open these with a fully charged system, refrigerant would come out of this line in a gas form. But since we have none, it's all good. So we'll close these to start, and then we'll get our vacuum pump, which looks like this. And then I'm just gonna put it on the bucket here. And all a vacuum pump is exactly what it sounds like. It sucks air, evacuates air out of the whole AC system. And what that does is it removes moisture, because when you're under a vacuum, water can evaporate easily, more easily. So we're gonna hook this up now, and water in an AC system is not good. So that's why you do this. And it's another reason why you shouldn't just go to the store and if you have an empty AC system, just fill it up with refrigerant, because you're filling up with refrigerant and whatever atmosphere was in the system to begin with, which means there's water in there, a little bit of water, and water's not good. So we hooked up our vacuum pump, and what we're going to do is we're just going to flip it on. It has oil in the reservoir, so make sure it has oil up to the middle of the sight glass. We're just going to turn it on. Hopefully you guys saw that. Just tip it down. So all I did was connect that line hand tight to the side of this pump here, and now it's running. So we'll take a look at the gauges, and we're going to open the gauges. So when we open the low side, you'll see it'll go into a negative pressure. You hear the pump change there. So we're going to move it down, hopefully move the gauge down to negative 30 inches of mercury, and we'll open the high side as well. And right now what we're doing is we're letting the pump run, and we're letting it pull a vacuum on this whole system. So there's going to be now negative pressure in these lines. And we're going to listen for any like obvious leaks, which I don't hear, just kind of preliminarily. Okay, so we're down to minus 30 inches of mercury, and we're going to shut these here. Shut the pump off. Now we're going to watch this gauge. Now I have another X-Trail actually, and when we did this on the last one, it shot right back to 0 very quickly. So what that was is there was a major leak in the low side port. So on this tube down by the compressor, there was like an actual like 1/8 inch hole, and it was rusted, and it just blew itself out. And so this would go right back to 0 very quickly. In this vehicle, it's actually holding quite well. Like, it hasn't moved. I know it's only been a minute, but it hasn't moved at all. So at that point, you can pretty well eliminate the fact that there is a major leak in this system. And so if you take this evidence along with the evidence that it took a very long time for the air conditioning system to fail, would lead you to believe that there's a very slow leak. So there can be leaks in the O-rings, there can be pinhole leaks in these hoses right here around the fittings, any number of places, in the condenser, around the compressor, in the compressor, around the compressor fan belt or belt pulley. So lots of different places. So at this point, I'm pretty confident it doesn't have a major leak. But I'm gonna leave it on here for about half an hour and see if this gets any closer to zero. So we'll come back and look at that in about half an hour. Okay, so it's been about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and the needle on the vacuum side has not moved at all. So I'm pretty confident it's a very, very slow minor leak. If you were worried, this is the stage where you would add dye. So what you can do with these systems is you can buy cans of this stuff here. So what this is refrigerant dye. So this has refrigerant and dye in it. This one happens to be from Canadian Tire. And what you would do is, using the hose that comes in the kit, which these things are all over the place. They come in different variations, they get different looks. Sometimes this is just a dye, it's just a little fluid bottle, or it's like in a syringe, or like a caulking gun. Different ways of introducing it to the system. This one, you would hook the, you turn this valve all the way out, screw it onto the can all the way, and then turn this valve down and it punctures the can. And then when you back it back out, it then lets the fluid, the refrigerant and dye, to flow through into the low side port. As I said before, that's where you introduce your chemicals and refrigerant. So, I don't know, like, I have such a small leak, if a leak at all, that I'm not gonna bother wasting this can of dye, because I feel like it's gonna be difficult to find the leak, because you have to use a UV light and shine it around, and basically what this does is it leaks out. You can see it with your naked eye, but you can see it even better with a UV light. So it would leak out in the place where the refrigerant is leaking, and then you'd find it, make that repair, evacuate the system properly, recharge the system properly, and then you're good to go. But because I have such a small leak, I'm not even gonna bother using this today. We're just gonna recharge the system, and I'm hoping it lasts like at least another year, couple years, whatever it may be. If I find that it leaks out in like a month, a couple months, then we'll add the dye and we'll get more in depth with this. So at this point, like I said, because it's not leaking, we're gonna go ahead and run the vacuum pump for about half an hour. And what that's gonna do is just vacuum the system out. It's gonna run the air through the oil. The water's gonna go through, it's gonna dissipate. You're gonna totally dry the system out before you introduce new refrigerant into it, which will help the system last longer. It's better for the system, that type of thing. So we're gonna open up turn on the pump, open up the low side, and see when I turn that on, the needle doesn't even move. That's a good sign. And then we're gonna open up the high side. And like I said, we're gonna let that run for 20 minutes, half an hour, just totally evacuate the system of any moisture and air. Okay, so while that's evacuating, we're gonna talk a little bit about these refrigerant cans. You get it like Canadian Tire, automotive stores, whatever. So this one I bought comes with 2 cans of refrigerant here, and this gauge. And the coupler that goes onto the low side, and obviously the puncturing valve. So if you read on the can here, it says it's equivalent to 16 ounces, 454 grams of R134A. So if you go onto your car's hood, somewhere there'll be a sticker that looks like this one. Try to get that. Not super clear, but if you look there, there's basically an air conditioner data tag or sticker, and it'll tell you what refrigerant it needs and how much. So in the X-Trail, it requires R134A refrigerant, which is a pretty popular refrigerant, and the amount is 0.55 kilos or 1.21 pounds. And then it also even tells you the compressor lubricant, which is Nissan UV Luminous Oil Type S. So that's another thing with Nissan. I'm pretty sure they put in UV dye in the oil right from the factory. So if you had a UV light and a leak, you could just shine your light in there and see where. I've shined a UV light in there and I can't for the life of me find the leak. Another thing you can do that I didn't mention, I should mention now, to find a leak is you can compress the system instead of evacuating it, and thereby using like bubble leak detector, which is like a liquid like this right here that you can just put on fittings and it'll show you the smallest leaks there are. So you shouldn't compress the system. Well, you definitely shouldn't compress the system with just compressed air in your shop. You can, but then it goes all back to the fact that you're just injecting atmosphere into the system, which has tons of water in it at that point, and basically it's just harmful for the system. So what if you do have the means to do it, you can inject nitrogen into this hose here and then pressurize the system and then spray around the vehicle, check for leaks. But it's who has a can of nitrogen sitting around unless you're like an HVAC tech. So I don't have that. That would be another way you could find pinhole leaks, really small leaks, that type of thing. But again, this is supposed to be a basic video and just to give you guys a little bit of information and kind of fix this AC system in the simplest way possible, given what we have here. So yeah, back to these refrigerant cans. These are Red Tech, Canadian Tire, so it's 12A refrigerant, and again, it's equivalent to R134A, but at a different sort of ratio. So in this can there's 170 grams. So here's the math here. So 170 grams equals 454 grams of R134A, and then I just did 459 divided by 170. So basically 2.67 grams of what's in the can is equal to 1 gram of R134A, which is what the Nissan requires. So it requires 0.55 kilos, which is 550 grams of it. So really we need to add 205 grams by weight of this stuff. So kind of sucks because these cans are 170 gram cans, and I don't want to open this up for like 30 grams or whatever, 35 grams of refrigerant. So I'm probably just going to install this one full can completely, verify that the AC is working, which I think off one can it should, and then when I work on, I think my dad's bringing his car, so we're gonna have another can of this open, so I'll top it up with the last remaining amount that we need. The easiest way to measure if you're doing partial cans of this stuff is to just get like a kitchen scale, like a little weigh scale, and you just set your can there. You got to set it up in a fashion that you could measure what is leaving this can as you're introducing it into the vehicle. So you'll see what I mean by that when we put this can in. As you let the liquid slash vapor out of this can, it'll obviously get lighter. You're just going to measure how much lighter it gets. So in my case, it would be 35 grams I need to remove from this second can, which again, I'm not going to do today. This is how you would do it. So see you guys back here in, I don't know, 25 minutes, and we'll start introducing the refrigerant into these lines. Okay, so we've run the vacuum pump there for about half an hour. So we're going to close the valves, shut the pump off, disconnect it. Okay, so there is an adapter that goes onto the can and then goes onto your vacuum line, so you can introduce the refrigerant to the yellow line through the blue port into the low side line. But we're going to do it sort of the home way, like you would do it if you didn't have gauges. So what we're going to do is we're going to close the low side valve. And keep in mind there's still a vacuum on this system. So we're going to close that valve. We're going to leave it connected for a sec. And then what we're going to do is we're going to hook up our can. So we're going to make sure this is turned all the way counterclockwise. We're going to screw it onto our refrigerant can. And then we're going to turn this down till it punctures it. And then there is a little bit of air. Some people will be like, yeah, there's air in this right here, which again is why you should introduce it through this line. But this little amount of air is not going to make a huge difference. So what we're going to do is we're just going to remove this quick coupler and then connect this one right away. Like so. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up this can, and we're actually putting in this whole can. So we'll go ahead and do that. So as I open this, I can hear the refrigerant running in. And the vacuum is actually helping that refrigerant go in. See the gauge going up, building up pressure. And if you wanted to just go by pressure, adding one can, you want to be between 30 and 40 psi on the low side with the engine running. So we're just letting it go in there. And we know we're putting in the full can, so I've just got the valve wide open. And you can feel it in there, it's still liquid. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn the car on, and we're going to turn on the AC. We're going to confirm that the AC compressor is clicking on. So the way the AC compressor works quickly is when you activate the AC in the cab, there's basically a clutch that it's magnetic, and as the belt's spinning, it comes together, and that's what actually starts the pump pumping. So you're going to want to see that the front of the compressor is actually turning, not just the belt spinning around the compressor. And you'll be able to hear it too. It clicks, and then you'll see all of a sudden it'll start moving. So we'll turn it on, and we'll make sure the compressor comes on now that there's refrigerant in the system. So AC's on high, and you can see we're at 30 psi on the low, and here we're creeping up to 100 psi. And it might be hard to see, but if you look down in there, I can see the front of the compressor turning. So I'm going to see if you can see in there, there's the compressor, and the front of it is spinning. That front face. If that front face wasn't spinning, it means the compressor is off and not pumping. And as the refrigerant goes in, the can will get lighter. You tip it upside down so you get going in a little quicker. You can feel the can getting cold. Sort of how your AC system works. Building up pressure on the high side, which means our compressor likely is working. I believe on this car we want to be between 150 and 200 psi on the high side when the compressor's on. If we get to there, great. If we don't, it might mean there's something wrong with the compressor. You can feel the can getting a little bit lighter. There is still a little bit of refrigerant still in there. That run out. Let's go check the cab temperature. It's definitely blowing colder, and you can see that, but we're at 39 Fahrenheit, which is pretty good. Like I said, we want to be about, just above freezing, but that's not too bad considering we've only delivered almost half of one, or almost one can, and it does require about a quarter of another can, which we aren't going to add, but it's blowing pretty cold right now, which is nice. So I think we definitely fixed the problem. So at this point, I'm gonna finish emptying that can, and we'll disconnect it, and then we'll check the pressures again just one final time. Okay, so can's totally empty. Disconnect this. Put on our test. So we got about 35 psi, 30 psi, and just over 100 on the high side, which seems low. But again, it is a little bit low on refrigerant because we haven't put that other can in, and the compressor is quite old. So it could be a combination of things, but I'll show you in the cab. It's still blowing quite cold. Yeah, it's pretty cool in here. And now it's dropped down to 38. So not too bad. Pretty happy with that. So yeah, we're just going to disconnect our gauges, and yeah, we should be good to go. So like I said, if you want to get really technical with it, you can add the exact amount of refrigerant using a scale, but again, I don't think it's necessary. We're just going to disconnect these. Put our caps back on. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Again, this isn't a video totally about AC systems. It would be so long to do a video on everything that could be wrong with these, but I just hopefully I kind of went over all the basics, so some of you guys can do this stuff at home. And the can is totally empty, so we did get one full can in. There'll be a little bit of come out, and that's a little bit left in the can, because you can't really get it completely out because there's still pressure on the system, which is in the can, so it equalizes between the can and the thing. So we got it all in, and yeah, I think we're pretty good. So I'll monitor it for the next couple months, stuff like that. If it does drop down, that's when we'll add the dye, and we'll find where the leak is, fix the leak, and kind of go from there. So hopefully it doesn't happen, but if it does, I'll try to make a video on it. Thanks for watching, guys.